Does everyone have a copy of Lesson 7 and 8 of Ecclesiastes? We're in Lesson 7 and 8 of Ecclesiastes. We're looking at, of course, kind of looking at a new section of the book, because really chapters 1 through 6 deals a lot with life under the sun, which of course just means here on earth. If you look in the introduction, Ecclesiastes 7 through 12 really is a section which many people believe is Solomon looking in basically the right direction. Again, whereas previous chapters he focused on things under the sun and focused on earth and focused on life with and without God, things like that. He really in chapter 7 through chapter 12 shows you need to get your heart right with God. Since we got to be focused on God, since life without God is meaningless, we got to be focused on life with God and maintaining life with God. Chapter 7 offers a lot of words of wisdom, but also some facts about wisdom as well. Chapter 8 addresses the subject of one's attitude toward leaders and speaks more on man's purpose and need for God. And so we'll see some of that in chapter 8. In chapter 7, though, we'll begin in verse 1 and read verses 1 through 10. It says, a good name, which is basically, this is talking about a reputation, a good name is better than precious ointments, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance, the heart is made better. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of the fools is in the house of mirth. It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This also is vanity. Surely oppression maketh a wise man mad, and a gift destroyeth the heart. Better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry, for anger resteth in the bosom of fools. Say not thou, what is the cause that the former days were better than these? For thou dost not inquire wisely concerning this. And so a lot of things here is very reflective, very similar to the verbiage Solomon would use in the book of Proverbs that we see here. Just a lot of things, very similar verbiage to how he used words and phrases in the book of Proverbs. And so just notice some of these things, though, these different sayings of wisdom he brings up. He says, of course, a good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. It's interesting. He's saying, of course, that a good reputation is better than owning precious, again, a valuable ointment. You see, it's better than that. That's what he's addressing there in that first part. And then, of course, on letter B, on page 2, you see, if one dies, it is better than living. The one who fears God awaits heaven. That's the point. The day of one's death is the better than the day of one's birth, because when a person dies, they await in comfort eternity. You see, we read about that, of course, when we discuss things about Hades and how we await in Hades for heaven. We also see that just looking at verses 2 through 4 with me, it says, it is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For that is the end of all men, and the living will lay it to his heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance, the heart is made better. By the way, what's a countenance? This is also used in the King James Version and maybe some other translations in Genesis chapter 3 when it talks about Cain. You read about Cain, and God would say to Cain, when his offering wasn't pleasing to God, but Abel's was, God would say to Cain, why has your countenance fallen? Well, what's he talking about there? What's a countenance? We don't use that word a whole lot today.
Conscience?
No, it sounds like conscience, but it's something different. Countenance. It's basically, did you?
I was going to read the definition of it.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
It's a feeling of trust, a belief in one's own abilities, or certainty about something, because for the Latin word, we need to trust firmly.
And so that would be something a little bit in regards to this, but this is one thing to remember, of course, this is very old English when it uses the word countenance. But this is the idea of one's face, facial features. Like if someone's sad, their face is fallen. You see, this is why Cain's got a frown on his face. Cain's got his face, his smile's turned upside down, as one might put it. That's what you see that in the book of Genesis. Why is your countenance fallen? Why is your face fallen? Why are you frowning like that? Is what God was asking him. And so that's what we're kind of seeing here when it says here, just notice again, sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance, even though the face looks sad, the heart is made better. Some translations say the heart might be glad. A person may be sad, may look sad in the face, but be glad in the heart. Well, why would that be the case? Again, this is all regarding funerals, by the way. So why would that be the case? Why is someone's sadness in the face, why would they be happy in their heart? Now, that sounds kind of odd right there. Why would someone have a sad face but be happy in their heart?
Outward appearance?
Well, the outward appearance. Why would they have that outward appearance? Yeah. Why would they have that outward appearance of sadness, but in their heart be happy?
Because they realize the importance. We're talking about the funeral part.
Yeah.
Because they know what's important in life.
Yeah.
And when they see someone that passed away, it brings to memory that to live a good life to be with Jesus.
Yeah. It encourages people to get their heart right with God. And maybe if their countenance is fallen, they're crying because, there's their loved one. But they know that loved one, maybe they know that loved one was focused on God, you see, throughout their life. They don't know if they were faithful towards the end, but maybe they knew that they at least knew the truth, and they had obeyed the gospel, at least in the New Testament perspective of looking at this. And so they can rejoice because at least that person at one time had their heart right with God, you see. And so as long as they maintain that, there's the hope of seeing them again. Any questions or comments on that? You keep looking on here again in looking at verse 4. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning. That's where the wise person goes. That's where he's going to go. He's going to take things to heart from the funeral because it's going to get him sobered up to focus and make him realize, look, death is certain. I need to be focused on what comes after, you see. But again, the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of the fools is in the house of mirth. What's mirth? There's a word we don't use a whole lot, mirth.
Partying. It's just not right.
A little bit different.
Yeah.
Mirth is basically kind of like the opposite of mourning. It's kind of, my understanding is it's kind of almost like it's kind of an odd word is what it is, because we don't use it a whole lot today, but it's just basically a reference to, just basically the exact opposite of what mourning would be.
It's happy somebody died because they're angry.
That could be it, yeah. Also on top of that, some translations say the house of feasting, I think also. Again, it's just a house where there's kind of celebration going on. Any questions or comments on that? You move on from there then, of course, the next few verses. Verse 5 says, it is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. Now, he actually goes into this a little bit with verse 6. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This also is vanity. Of course, you use a pot to cook things with. Have you ever burned thorns before? Taken time and maybe used some thorns and thrown them into a fire? Do you know what happens if you do that? Yeah, it just It just crackle, and it gives you a little bit of heat, and that's it. That's all it does. It gives you a burst of heat, and that's it. You know, you throw leaves onto a fire, dried leaves. What happens? It bursts, and then that heat's gone, you see. And it's the same thing here with the fools, you see. With the fools, and the cackling of fools, and the song of fools. You know, this is the idea. If you go over to letter D, one must be willing to take advice rather than enjoy foolishness. The fool's song is a temporary burst of laughter. The fool's compliments, his song, his praises, things like that. That's just a sudden burst. Acting foolish, it may bring you a temporary enjoyment. But guess what? It's not lasting, you see. It's like throwing leaves on a fire. One burst of heat, and then it's gone. Throwing a bunch of twigs or thorns on a fire. It's a bunch of crackling. It goes bursting up, and then it's gone, you see. It's not real good fuel for fire. It may be good for starting a fire, but it's not really good for fueling a fire, you see. So that's what we're seeing here. Again, thorn bushes, number 2 there underneath letter D. Thorn bushes burn up fast. You won't have a good fire to warm yourself for long if you build it with nothing but thorn bushes. If you just take a bunch of thorns, no wood, no chopped up wood, no thicker branches, things like that you chop up. If all you do is throw a bunch of thorn bushes onto a fire, it's not going to last that long. It's going to be a big burst, and then it's all going to burn up. Again, same thing with leaves, same thing, dried leaves, same thing with a lot of other, you know, if it's not, it's just not good fuel for a fire. And it's the same thing here. If a fool, it's, you know, fool's song, listening to the song of fools, listening to the laughter of fools, not willing to take advice, things like that, just hearing the praise of foolish people and not willing to take advice, well, that's only going to bring any temporary enjoyment, and then it fails. I mean, think about it from this perspective. You know, if you are, let me just think of an analogy here. I have a couple I've used before, but one particular one, basically, think of it like this. If I am trying to basically use an air fryer, well, not an air fryer, let's say a fryer at a restaurant. And I'm trying to use this fryer at the restaurant, and, you know, it's got timers on them. They have timers on them so that way you don't burn the food by accident, at least if you're in fast food. And so you put the food in there. Well, someone says, and I just hit a random button. I don't even hit the button for, like, let's say I throw fries in there. I just hit a random button. Well, you know, let's say that button said chicken. Chicken goes for 5 minutes. Fries go for 2.5 minutes. Those fries are going to be charcoal black when they come up. Someone says, well, you did a good job. Well, you know, just Song of Fools, that you did a good job. You know, they just said, you hit a button, you threw it in the vat, you got all that right. That's foolish talk right there. And that's just being foolish. That's just one example. But, you know, if I need to take advice on, no, that's not right. You hit the wrong button, you see. You got to hit the one that says fries on it. That's how we had it organized. We had a button that said chicken, button that said fries, button that said onion strings, all kinds of things on that fryer. But we would do that, you see. And so, again, you need to take advice. A person can, this can apply not just to work, but any aspect in life. You know, you may get told praise for blowing up at someone. You know, sometimes in political debates, if someone blows up at their political opponents, yeah, you did a good job. Did they do a good job? Was that right for them to do? Well, no. An outburst of anger at your political opponent? No. You need to take advice. No. You should not have blown up. You should have maintained your patience in that situation, you see. But anyways, that's just a couple of examples there. Any questions or comments on that? Again, foolish people, they'll praise you for anything. The wise, though, they'll tell you what you need to hear. We can continue on with that, with other topics, but looking at the next verse 7. Surely oppression maketh a wise man mad, and a gift destroyeth the heart. Wise men get angry at oppression and bribes. They get mad at that. I mean, that's just a fact. That gift, it's kind of like Solomon speaking of this in kind of like a, with the quotation marks, a gift destroyeth the heart. Someone might say, well, I got a gift for you if you do this. You see, I've got a gift here in my hand if you'll do this for me, Judge. You see, just a gift. It's just a gift. Yeah, bribe. Yeah. That's what we're seeing. That's what that gift is. It's not a present. It's a bribe is what it is. And so what he's saying here is wise men get angry at oppression and bribes. They get mad at that. They're upset by that. A foolish person, they may not care either way. They may say, well, whatever. A foolish person might even think, how can I get involved in some of these bribes and get bribed? You see, how can maybe I can get rich through bribery, things like that. But the wise man hates and gets mad at bribes and oppression. Any questions or comments on that? You continue looking on through this section here. He continues on with verse 8 and 9. It says, better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry, for anger resteth in the bosom of fools. In other words, don't be quick to anger, but be patient. That's what he's saying here. Don't be quick to get angry and things like that. Don't be hasty in thy spirit to be angry. And he says, again, things that are a beginning of the matter is the end of a thing is better than the beginning. That's basically kind of just saying that, look, if there's a situation where people are getting angry at each other, better is its end than when it began, which is kind of obvious. And the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Proud man might get angry, and it's his way or the highway, and he's going to burst in anger at anyone who disagrees with him, you see. Sometimes that happens with someone who's proud. But he says that's why he says the patient is better, the patient in spirit than proud in spirit. Proverbs talks a lot about being slow to anger. Someone read for us Proverbs chapter 14, verse 29. And someone else also, Proverbs 15, verse 18.
He who is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who is quick-tempered exalts folly.
The importance of showing, again, there's wisdom in showing patience, being slow to anger. Again, someone read for us Proverbs 15, verse 18.
Wrathful man stirreth up strife, but he that is slow to anger easeth strife.
And so we see again, just stirs up strife. Person gets angry, person blows up. Guess what? That might cause someone else to blow up and another person to blow up. There's a reason why wars tend to get started over sometimes trivial matters, opinions, and things like that. We also see even in the New Testament that we are instructed to be slow to anger. Someone read for us James chapter 1 and verse 19.
James 1:19.
Yes.
This you know, my beloved brethren, that everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger.
And so we need to be ready to hear people out, but we also need to be slow to speak and slow to anger. If we're just quick to speak, quick to anger, what happens? We may say something dumb, for one thing. We may not, the Bible talks about how a person of many words can come to ruin. But also at the same time, we got to understand that we also got to be slow to temper, slow to anger.
Can't
Yes.
take the words back.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
If you can hurt somebody out of your anger, and
Yeah.
regret it, but you can't take that back.
Yeah.
You don't know how, what you've done to the other person.
Yeah. There was an article, I think I may have put it in the bulletin once or twice, but it's entitled Nails in the Fence. And what the story goes about this mother, she had a daughter, and her daughter kept putting, basically, she would say mean things to her mom. Well, and this might be kind of a different, I might be saying it a little bit different than the story goes, but what happened was every day that she would say something mean to her mother, she had to put a nail in the fence. And so she took a hammer and nailed a nail into the fence. Every day she said something mean, that fence got full of holes. But then her mother said, okay, every time you don't say something mean, or every day that you don't say something nasty, or maybe offer a compliment, you can take a nail out of the fence. Take the hammer, pull the nail out of the fence. Then, at some point in time, her daughter pulled them all out. There's so many holes in that fence. And her mom said, yeah. You see, when you can remove the nails. But guess what? There's still going to be damage. There's still going to be holes in that fence. You see, you can't take back what you said once you've said it. You see, be nice if you could get into a time machine or something, but you just can't. Go in time machine, beat up your former self or something before they open their mouth. But again, can't do that. And that's basically what we're seeing there in James 1:19 and other passages. You got to be slow to anger, slow to speak, careful in what you say. This is an interesting one, verse 10. Say not thou, what is the cause that the former days were better than these? Some translations basically say it like this: why are the days of old better than now? Basically kind of that idea that, you've heard the phrase good old days. What about the good old days? I miss the good old days. They were saying that back in 2,000 years ago during the days of Solomon, 3,000 years ago in the days of Solomon, rather, 3,000 years ago. Just imagine that, 3,000 years, 3 millennia ago, they were saying these things. And it says in verse 10, for thou dost not inquire wisely concerning this. It's interesting that he says that. It's because the good old days, saying the good old days, I miss the good old days. It distracts from the present, you see. Instead of focusing on the present and focusing on the future, you're saying, I miss those good old days when we used to have this and that. One preacher once put it like this. He said, well, back in those quote unquote good old days, we didn't have air conditioning. We didn't have good central air at all. And when it was really hot, some of those air conditioners tended to fail because, again, the good old days, you see. And the only way to get cooled off for a lot of people, instead of having an air conditioner, what they would do is they'd go sit on the back porch at night to cool off. And guess what? That's where you get mosquitoes. You get mosquito bit all night long trying to cool off. You see, that's your good old days for you. But anyways, that kind of connects with that a little bit. Again, there was bad stuff going on back in the good old days, you see. Here's an interesting thought question, though, at the top of page 3. What is the difference between longing for the good old days and Jeremiah's instruction to ask for the old paths? Some translations I think even say, seek ye the old paths. There in Jeremiah 6 verse 16. What's the difference between those two? Because Jeremiah is saying, look for the old paths. Look for when you were doing these things. And then we have the good old days. Well, what's the difference between those two? Someone might say the Bible contradicts itself. You got some people saying seek the old paths, and you've got another passage saying talking about the good old days. That's a contradiction. There's actually a difference between those two. What's the difference? What is Jeremiah calling for when he says seek the old paths? and walk therein.
The way of the Lord.
Yeah, the way of the Lord. Whereas the good old days here is, remember when King so-and-so was in power? Remember when, I miss the days when, Ronald Reagan was president. I miss those days. That was a good period of time. I miss those days. We got so much crazy stuff today. I wish we were in the Reagan era again, you see. A difference between good old days and following what the Lord said. You see, there's a difference between those two. That's the difference. Following the Lord versus wanting what was going on, society to be the same as it was 50, 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago. That's the difference. Any questions or comments on that? You had issues back then, you have issues today. Ecclesiastes 7, continuing on there in verses 11 through 20, it says, "Wisdom is good with an inheritance, and by it there is profit to them that see the sun. For wisdom is a defense, and money is a defense. But the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom giveth life to them that have it. Consider the work of God, for who can make that straight which he hath made crooked? In the day of prosperity be joyful, but in the day of adversity consider. God also hath set the one over against the other, to the end that man should find nothing after him. All things have I seen in the days of my vanity. There is a just man that perisheth in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man that prolongeth his life in his wickedness. Be not righteous over much, neither make thyself over wise. Why shouldest thou destroy thyself? Be not over much wicked, neither be thou foolish. Why shouldest thou die before thy time?" Some interesting verbiage here, especially from the King James perspective, but this is really a look at wisdom and righteousness and a deep look into those topics. An inheritance, of course, he's talking about wealth here. Wealth inherited maybe from family should be used with wisdom, you see. That's what he's saying here. Wisdom is good with an inheritance. That's what a person's going to act wisely. If a person acts wisely, it can work good things with an inheritance. It can share with the poor. It can set things up to where they have a retirement, things like that. Letter B, wisdom and money. Notice this right here. Wisdom and money are a protection or defense. What does that mean? How are they a protection and defense? Or rather, I should say a defense. I think some translations say just protection. How are wisdom and money a defense?
Doing goodwill with it.
Well, there's a lot of that would be something that a person could do with wealth. Yeah. Wisdom and defense are, wisdom and money are a defense in the sense that if you have wisdom, if you use your wisdom, guess what? You're probably not going to get into a whole lot of trouble. You see, at least not from maybe running your mouth, for example. You're not going to get yourself into trouble. You're going to know how to control your tongue, things like that. Money is a defense in terms of, just a whole lot of things. It can be a defense in terms of, when you need to retire. Well, you have a little nest egg that's going to help you through that retirement. Money can also be a defense in terms of if your physical health goes down. Well, you need to get medicine. So what do? You got to have money to buy the medicine. So that's sometimes what people, that's a protection in that regard, you see. And so money and defense are protections in that way. It's interesting, though. He says, again, wisdom is a defense and money is a defense, but the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom giveth life to them that have it. In other words, wisdom's better. Wisdom's the better defense. Again, as he's pointed out time and time again, life with God is important. He's pointed that out, that you need to have life with God, and he's pointed that out time and time again here in Ecclesiastes. And so here in chapter 7, when he says this, again, wisdom is better because it's going to keep you on the right track, you see. A poor man can have wisdom, but he's going to be on the right track. He's going to have a good relationship with God and things like that. Any questions or comments on that? You continue on with this particular section here. Continuing on again, verses 13 and 14. Consider the work of God, for who can make that straight which he hath made crooked? That's interesting verbiage right there, because he's used that before. He said that back in chapter 1. He said what's been made straight cannot be made crooked, or what's been made crooked cannot be made straight. And so when we're seeing that here, again, verse 13, consider the work of God, for who can make that straight which he hath made crooked? That should be a capital H with the he there, because that's God. God has made some things a certain way, and people can't straighten it out to try and make life without God better, basically. Verse 14, in the day of prosperity. This is reflective of this next statement here when he's saying this. Try and straighten out or make things more agreeable to the one who is wanting to change what God has done. But verse 14, in the day of prosperity, be joyful. But in the day of adversity, consider God also hath set the one over against the other, to the end that man should not, or rather should find nothing after him. What's crooked here that he's talking about is the fact that man cannot know what's going to happen in the future, you see. Man wants to know what's going to happen in the future. Man wants to know what's going to happen maybe after he dies, maybe 10 years from now, maybe sometime before he dies, the time of his life. Man wants to know the day he's going to die, you see. And so he considers the fact that he doesn't know that crooked. And he wants man wants that straightened out, if you will, to where he can see what's going to happen. Man considers it crooked, but Solomon is saying you can't change that, is the point. Not crooked in the sense of a crook as a thief, but crooked as in, as slanted lines and things like that. It just doesn't come off straight. You can't see ahead. You see, if something's crooked, think of it like this. If something's crooked and let's say you got a wall or something like this, and you're trying to see ahead, well, if something's crooked, and it's going behind the wall, you can't see what's in the future, you see. Any questions or comments on that? Hope that all made sense. But the whole point he's getting at too is that we will have good days and bad days. We cannot know the future. We're not going to know if tomorrow's going to be a good day for us or a bad day for us. We don't know if next week is going to be a good week or a bad week. We don't know if next year, let's say July 29th of next year is going to be a good day or bad day for us, you see. We don't know, and that's his whole point here, the overall point. We don't know what our future is going to bring. We don't know if there's going to be a good day, or what days are going to be good days and what days are going to be bad days. That's the whole point. Again, in the day of prosperity, be joyful. But in the day of adversity, consider, we don't know the days that are good or the days that are bad. That summarizes that second half. God hath set the one over the other, or rather against the other, to the end that man should find nothing after him. Again, you don't know the future. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, you see. You continue looking on. Looking then at verse 15, it says, all things have I seen in the days of my vanity. Again, vanity means futile, useless. He's basically saying the days of my useless life. There is a just man that perisheth in his righteousness. And there is a wicked man that prolongeth his life in his wickedness. That's an interesting verse right there. Someone says, well, he perisheth in his righteousness. Someone's doing what's right, and he dies for doing what's right. Someone does something that's sinful, that's wicked, and he prolongs his days in living wicked, you see. Again, good and bad things happen to both the righteous and the wicked, is the point. On page 4, underneath letter D, we of course have that number 1 there that says, if only Job's friends understood this. What is something you see continually throughout the book of Job? Just a good hunk of the book of Job is Job's friends saying, you need to repent, basically. You need to repent. You sinned. Why won't you admit you sinned? Why don't you repent of your sin already, Job? Even though Job did not commit sin. You see, all that bad stuff happened to him. You committed sin. That's why this is going on. We need to remember that that's not the case. Good and bad things happen to both the righteous and the wicked. He continues on, verse 16. Be not righteous over much, neither make thyself over wise. Why should thou destroy thyself? Be not over much wicked, neither be thou foolish. Why shouldest thou die before thy time? What's he even saying here? This is weird, some odd verbiage. Even if we could, looking at other translations, could someone read another translation of, besides the King James Version, a different translation of verses 16 and 17 of Ecclesiastes 7?
The ESV says, be not overly righteous, do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Be not overly wicked, neither be a fool. Why should you die before your time?
What's he even talking about there? Shouldn't we want to be righteous before God? Be wise before God? Be wise, be a wise people, be a righteous people? How could one possibly be overly righteous or overly wise?
I think he's trying to say, do not be, when he's talking about overly wise, he's being self-sufficient, that you're relying on yourself, not on wisdom or truth. You're relying on the same thing Paul talks about in some of his writings. Do not have an overestimation of yourself.
Yeah. It's kind of an arrogant wisdom. It's a wisdom according to this world. Do not be so, don't have this overly righteousness or over high wisdom. You might say this overly righteous or overly wise, basically an arrogant version of worldly righteousness, what the world looks at what is right, and what the world looks at as wise. You see, don't behave in that way. You see, we do need to be wise. We need to be righteous. But he's talking about that kind of arrogant righteousness and wisdom that comes from a worldly standard of righteousness and wisdom, what the world regards as right, what the world regards as wise. Again, things of this world, wise and righteous by those standards. Any questions or comments on that?
Than anybody else.
Yeah. Almost kind of an arrogant thinking of I'm better than everyone else. I'm more righteous than everyone else. I'm more wise than everyone else. Things like that. Again, just an arrogant attitude, pretty much. And he's telling them, don't have that. Don't have that type of attitude because you will destroy thyself. Think about that. How would that destroy a person? How would being overly righteous and overly wise, how does that destroy a person?
Well, you lose a lot of friends.
Yeah, you could lose friends, yeah.
People just don't want to be around them.
Yeah.
They think he's a stuffy
Yeah.
shirt.
Yeah, you can lose friends. You lose your relationship with God by being arrogant. There's a lot of things we can look at that shows how a man destroys himself when he's trying to be like that. And then, of course, verse 17, be not overmuch wicked, neither be thou foolish. Why shouldest thou die before thy time? In other words, don't take the self-righteous, self-wise attitude and don't go as far as to be foolish and wicked. either. Don't go all out and trying to be foolish and wicked in this world. And so, because again, that often leads to a person dying before their time, because they act foolish, they talk foolish, they speak foolish. That can often, a person that speaks foolishly their mouth can get them into trouble sometimes. Smart off at someone, smart off about the king, you might get stoned, things like that. Any other questions or comments on that? Wish we could continue on. There's a lot of things that we see, especially later on in chapter 7 and chapter 8, that just really are really interesting things to look at. He looks a lot at basically the king, relationship with the king, and things like that. Just so many things that we need to that we should consider in terms of rulers, maybe even in terms of bosses. Later on in chapter 10, we're going to see. It's actually interesting. We're going to see a phrase used regarding not talking bad about the king behind his back, and that has to deal with. It's interesting because the verbiage talks about a bird will tell it to him. That's where we get our phrase, our statement, a little birdie told me. A little bird told me. Why? Well, that's just talking about how the word gets reported back, you see. A lot of different statements throughout these next chapters. A lot of things he talks about. Again, sobering reality is a main focus that Solomon repeats throughout this book. Any questions or comments on that before we close? Yes.
Just as Ecclesiastes is one of those books like Proverbs that it does us good sometimes to take like the 100-foot view of the book, because he does a lot of comparison or parallels, and it's easy to kind of get confused sometimes about what he's talking about. But basically, as you mentioned Job earlier, the view at this time was that if you do good, good things will happen.
Yeah.
If you do bad, bad things will happen. And so if Job is suffering all these things, he must be this blatant sinner.
Yeah.
That's their view. And, the author here is trying to get us to understand that we have no control.
Yes.
That there's things that are set in motion, that it doesn't always work that way. The good people don't always receive good things. The bad people don't always receive bad things. And sadly, that view stems over into New Testament Christianity too. There's numerous people who believe that because they're a Christian, they're beyond reproach. They're not supposed to suffer. They're not supposed to be, ridiculed or any of those things. And they even want to pass laws that you can't even speak evil about them.
Yeah.
Well, that flies in the face of what Paul tells Timothy.
Yeah.
That all who desire to live godly will suffer persecution.
Yeah.
Paul didn't say, well, go ahead and put those people in jail and try to get rid of all the people who might persecute you.
Yeah.
No, it's a waste of time. You're never going to control them.
Yeah. Write a letter to Caesar and tell him, hey, can you arrest everybody that hates Christians? Well, it's just, crazy to think you can try and do something like that. But yeah, very, very good points on that. Again, it's a very sobering book that encourages to look at some of the hardships of life, some of the more sobering facts about life that we need to all consider and take to heart. With that, we'll go ahead and conclude today.